I'm the convener. Now, Jack is going to talk, as you know, about community resilience, right down to earth in our own communities. Is your community ready? And a lot of us won't be able to say that. So we'll delve into these aspects of that particular problem. Long-time member of our climate declaration, much longer than me. Jack has done a lot of writing. He's done a lot of academic work, and he's promoting, like we all are, but Jack in particular, and Pat with her writing, the economy of enough, which is Jeanette Fitzsimon's mantra, and we all enjoy that one. And he facilitates Degrowth Aotearoa New Zealand, and a community resilience project. So without further ado, we'll start with the karakia, and I'm going to repeat last week's one, because the opening one, because it was so appropriate for tonight, and its title is Smooth Seas. Kia ora te marino, kia whakapapapuna mu te moana. Hei, kua rahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I te tātou katoa. Hui e. Taiki. May peace be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other, bind us all together. And now I hand over to you, Jack.
Oh, thank you very much, Bev.
And I'm muting my screen. Muting my screen.
Okay.
Everybody.
All right. Good evening, everyone. The slide that is up there now, community resilience is about living well sustainably together, whatever life throws at us, is the basic message for tonight. And what I hope to do is to unpack it and discuss each of the main concepts in a bit more detail. The format for tonight is going to differ a little bit from our previous webinars, where instead of speaking for 30 or 40 minutes and then having discussion, because there's some concepts in here that I think are interesting and you might want to make comments on or ask questions about, I'll stop at various points along the way so that we can explore some of these issues as we go along. So be prepared to have your questions as we go. The other thing I wanted to say is that while what's up there on the screen may sound like it's not only desirable, but should be a fairly easy thing to do, given the challenges that we face, I'm not sure it is. So I'm not sure we really know how to do this, given the global scale of the ecosystem changes that we're dealing with. What I'm going to present tonight is something that a few of us have put together. It's an approach to community resilience that you may find a bit different from what's typically talked about in terms of community resilience. And it's not presented as the answer. It's presented as the start of a dialogue. So please feel free to question, critique, add ideas, contribute to making it stronger. Okay. The couple of other general comments I'd like to make is that I'm going to focus more on what community resilience is about rather than how to do it. We'll talk a little bit about how, but I think that's best left for another time in great detail. So it's really trying to get the concepts clear and constructive. So that's the intent here. The other thing that general comment I'd like to make is that I want to emphasize what is necessary from an ecological perspective as opposed to what is politically feasible. I think that too often we focus on what's feasible, politically and socially feasible, and we kind of lose sight of what is actually necessary based on the science that we're already aware of. And I'm hoping that by focusing more on what's necessary, it will affect how we deal with what we think is feasible, and maybe open that Overton window a bit more, because there's such a discrepancy between what's needed and what is politically feasible. Okay, so the basic message is there, but let's start unpacking it. The formal title for tonight is here, and it's going to bring together issues around climate adaptation, earthquakes, a range of other adverse events that we might face, as well as
Jerry, look,
the
I'm
issue
just
of
on the
basic
middle
needs.
of a webinar. I'll give you a ring back when it's finished.
Yeah, if everyone could please mute themselves,
Yeah,
that would
okay,
be
sure.
helpful.
Yeah.
Please mute yourself, thanks. So it doesn't, we're going to talk about a lot of things that are connected. So it doesn't, would everyone please mute yourself, especially if you're just joining? Thank you. That's it. That's great. Thanks. There's a whole range of issues that are connected in terms of climate, earthquakes, and a whole range of other risks and basic needs. And we want to, it doesn't matter if you are concerned about all of these or just one of them or just some of them, or you think that, you know, civilization is in collapse. I think the approach that we're going to present tonight speaks to all of those. Okay? Because it's really about risk management and what the benefits of approaching it in the way that we're going to describe. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about some of the risks and uncertainties, you know, the adverse events that we're facing, and what the remaining certainty is in terms of universal basic needs. Talk a bit about government limits in dealing with these issues, placing more responsibility on communities to deal with the issues themselves. We're also going to bring in the issue of contrasting worldviews or mindsets, because I think these are incredibly important just in how we see the science, as well as how we respond to the information we have about what we're facing. We'll talk a little bit about what a resilient community might look like in some general terms, and the benefits, and a little bit about how to move in this direction. Okay. So let's get on to the first point there, the likely risks. I first would like to make what I think it's a really important distinction between adverse events and disruption. Because adverse events are things that happen, but disruption is the reaction to those adverse events. And if we think about them separately, we can appreciate that how well prepared we are for adverse events will determine how disruptive they are to our lives and and living well, which is what we all assume life should be like. So these are some of the likely adverse events. Earthquakes, of course, are a big issue. The Alpine Fault, we know, is likely to go before too long. I'm sure almost all of you who are on the line this evening have been affected in some way by the climate storms or floods or droughts or fires or slips, and certainly we've all been affected by the pandemic. The big issue of biodiversity loss. And one issue that we often don't think about in terms of biodiversity loss is that collectively we rely on a fairly narrow range of plants and animals for our well-being and living well. And these, of course, are at risk from climate change and biodiversity loss. We don't have quite the range that people have had in the past, or some people do, but they're not widely available. Energy security is obviously a big issue, not only the kind of energy we use, but how much energy we use. And again, COVID brought supply chain issues into focus, in terms of availability of foods, medicines, and other essential goods. So what I take from this large and growing range of potential adverse events is that the future is going to be much more uncertain than the past, or that it generally has been in the past. One might say that the only certainty is uncertainty, and that these adverse events are likely to increase over time. But again, remember, adverse events and disruption from those events are two different issues, and it's going to be important to distinguish those. Now, some of these events are sort of quick, discrete ones like earthquakes, whereas some of the climate and other issues are slow events. As you know, we evolved to deal with the fast, immediate ones, the saber-toothed tigers attacking our camp. We have a harder time dealing with the slow ones, but they're equally important, if not more important at this point. Okay, let's stop at this point, and I'd like to get some reactions to this list of adverse events and what you think about them. Do you feel them? Do you think they need attention? Do you think disruption can be avoided or minimized? Do you think the distinction between adverse events and the disruption from them is a useful distinction? Just Bruce, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jack. Wonderful topic and looking forward to the rest of the session. I just wanted to be clear what you meant by energy security as an adverse event. What's the specific adverse event? What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a whole range of issues related to energy. There's the whole issue of oil depletion. We rely on oil to a large extent. And the problem is that we have to get rid of it because it's, a major greenhouse gas emitter. But even if we continue using it, it's going to be at risk because of the fact that we don't have any locally, and it's depleting. We know that globally, and supply chain disruptions. I mean, the Straits of Hormuz is getting hotter and hotter in terms of violent conflict. That certainly was going to disrupt supplies as the Russian invasion of the Ukraine disrupted supplies of natural gas to Europe and other places. Right. Neil has a hand up there.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, look, I think this polycrisis really boils down to two things. Really, it's, ecological overshoot and pro-sociality issues. There's also health decline, but putting that to one side. I mean, the real issues right now is that we've got severe geopolitical turmoils unfolding right in front of us. Here in Asia, China and Taiwan, Korea, we've got the Middle East, and we've got Ukraine. We've got to be thinking about imminent fossil fuel depletion, and that could happen extremely rapidly. So that's what we've got to be preparing for, is firstly a complete energy crisis. We've got to be thinking about almost, a severe reduction in fossil fuels. So what are we going to do then? So energy is going to be huge. So materials is going to, and throughput and energy, that's going to be a really massive issue. The other thing is, of course, is pro-sociality. So how are we going to coordinate all this? How are we going to cooperate?
Yeah, well, that's if I could just stop you there, Neil, because the whole pro-sociality or solidarity issue is going to come up later. Just want to have a discussion at this point about these risks and get people's sense of how important they are to deal with.
Yeah.
Because
okay,
there doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and-
out of the energy issues and of the geopolitical, as you've mentioned, the supply chains are going to be impacted severely. We could have things like cyber attacks. These things need to be talked about immediately, and there's nothing happening as far as I can tell.
Yeah, not enough, certainly, yeah. Anyone else comment about how they feel about these adverse events that are increasingly likely?
I'm very worried, as Neil is, that World War III is about to explode, and that sort of undermines so much that's been done so far and puts off to the distant future ever reaching the goals that we need to reach. So that's my comment.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ben. Bev, and Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, so my point was looking at New Zealand as a country. I guess I'm concerned that as a country we're not trying to protect ourselves against international risks. We have a very export-focused economy, and we're not trying to regionalize the economy at the moment, which would be one way to protect ourselves against outside shocks of any kind. So I think coming back to the disruption, we could reduce the risk of disruption by regionalizing our economy much more, even if adverse events happen.
Yeah, the whole issue of relocalization, I think, is very, very relevant. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Well, one of the points I wanted to make about all of these risks is that it's increasing uncertainty about our ability to live well. But I think one of the things that remains certain is that our universal basic needs are going to continue to remain the same. It's not generally well known, but there's an extensive literature on what are referred to as universal basic needs. And they include both material and non-material needs. And these are needs that people from a millennia ago had, and people a millennia in the future will have. So they're very basic. And it may sound very uninspiring to be talking about universal basic needs, but I'd like to make a few comments that I hope will convince you that they're quite aspirational. Even if we look at material needs, much of the world, including in New Zealand, people's material needs are not necessarily being well met. In New Zealand, for example, we have about 1 million people who do not enjoy food security, right? Or even good basic health care. So the other interesting thing about material needs is that they are all satiable. Unlike the things that we desire as a result of marketing, these material needs are all satiable with, a minimum amount of energy and material inputs to satisfy them. The other interesting thing, so it has a big impact in terms of ecological overshoot, which Neil mentioned just a little while ago, which I would agree is the underlying issue. And the non-material needs are equally important to live well. A sense of identity, whether it's ethnic or national or sexual orientation or religious, or in terms of your worldview, being able to express an identity is a basic need, as is role in community, because we're social animals. All of these needs are ones that have evolved. We have lived and survived because these needs have been satisfied in the past, and we need to continue satisfying them in the future. So the role in community, a meaningful role in community, is a very important non-material need, as is a voice, that is being able to participate in making decisions that affects one's life, and basic things like leisure time and time with friends and families. The interesting thing about the non-material needs is that they don't require a lot of energy and material inputs as the material needs do. But the other thing that's really important about them is that these are needs that extensive research on happiness and life satisfaction demonstrate are what is most important. Yet they get pushed out of our consciousness by the marketing for material goods and services that companies can make money with. And so I think part of the anxieties and malaise that we may feel as a result of these non-material needs not being more in focus. So both from an ecological overshoot perspective and from a living well or happiness, general life satisfaction perspective, I would like to make the argument that the importance of universal basic needs is something we should give more attention to. I'm curious as to your reactions to that idea. What do you think about focusing on universal basic needs as something that we want to ensure are not disrupted by these adverse events? Whatever the adverse events are, they're likely to disrupt one or more of these universal basic needs. So that's why I see them as central to connecting all of the adverse events that we've talked about and many that we haven't had an opportunity to talk about. Bruce, you're good with getting your hand up there. Go ahead.
Yeah, these are very closely related to things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other things. And my answer to your direct question is you're absolutely right. Any civilization, so-called, that we have is based on the satisfaction of both of those core needs. And once you've got those core needs, you're both material and immaterial. You have the chance to both live a good life and contribute a good life, a good life to others. So I'm totally in favor of that list of yours. As I said, look at something like the UDHR. Look at the inner ring of the donut. There's a lot of overlap there. It's a nice framing you've got of it. Thanks.
Yeah, the other point I meant to mention is that in this webinar series, we had a presentation by Ian Goff on universal basic needs, and it's still on our declaration website if anyone is interested in delving into them a little bit more. Any other comments on the relevance of universal basic needs? Okay, we'll go on to the next point then and move on to the issue of government's involvement in dealing with adverse events. Now, thank goodness we have civil defense and disaster management resources in New Zealand, and that the government's paying some attention to it. But it's really important that we understand what they can and cannot do for us, and why we need to think about additional community reactions to adverse events. So civil defense and disaster management deals primarily with the immediate impact of an adverse event. And they generally look at a kind of 2-week window when they're available to provide the kind of assistance that's required. So there's limited capacity. Many very, very impressive and dedicated people that I know in local councils who are involved in these areas do it part-time. They have many other responsibilities. So there's, not enough funding, one could argue, and resources available. So thank goodness we have them, but appreciate that they're limited in their capability. And I think we've seen very clearly that with Gabrielle, who happened in the North Island last year, the civil defense and disaster management resources were frequently overwhelmed, and communities were left on their own for extensive periods. Right? So being prepared for future events is increasingly difficult, in terms of the resources and in terms of possibility of multiple events at the same time. And I recently received something from our local council about what they're doing about these issues and updating their civil defense and disaster management plans, which were had many good aspects to them. But one thing that I noticed, that there was very little attention to preventing disruption in the first place prior to the event. And to me, that's a major aspect of building resilience, is thinking about how to prevent the disruption from the inevitable events that are likely to come our way. Okay. So again, it's helpful to make that distinction between the adverse events and the disruption. Okay. So what is community resilience? Well, it's typically thought of in terms of the ability to bounce back from an adverse event. But there's another really important aspect or meaning to it, which is less prominent, but I think even at least equally, if not more important, and that is the resisting the disruption from the adverse events in the first place, to organize society so that one can live well regardless of what is thrown at us. And I think it's also important to realize and to appreciate that resilience in either of these perspectives is relative in terms of the context of where we are. If we've just fallen off a cliff, having a parachute provides some resilience. And if we have a very small parachute, it might not provide as much resilience as a big parachute. But it would be even better if we hadn't been anywhere near the cliff so that we didn't get blown off in the first place. And that's the second definition or perspective on resilience is preventing in the first place. I've always thought of resilience as, in terms of the ideal conditions, is one where we have ecological sustainability to begin with. Not that we're just at the edge of sustainability or actually unsustainable, as all of our current systems are, but the ideal resilient condition is to have ecological sustainability plus a safety margin, to be some distance from that cliff so that we don't fall off should adverse events push us in that direction. Okay. So again, I think that's a little different from the way resilience is often thought about. It's often thought about only in relative terms rather than in what the ideal situation would be. So that's why I see this idea of community resilience is as much about ecological sustainability as it is about resisting disruption from adverse events. Okay, so those are the main points I wanted to make about resilience. And in terms of community, just wanted to underline the fact that community is the idea is common unity. Okay? And part of the challenges that we currently have is that we have polarization around many issues. And that has unfortunately increased in society, not as bad in New Zealand as it is in many other areas, but it's still here. And coming back to universal basic needs, that's something we can unite around. We can have some solidarity around. Even if we disagree with people's political views or opinions about various things, we share a common concern for universal basic needs. And so that potentially provides that focus for working together to increase our resilience as much as we can. Another way of thinking about community is what's the sort of space for community. I would suggest again from an ecological perspective that a regional catchment, bioregion, is the ideal, but we might have to get there sort of one neighborhood at a time. So anywhere we can start is going to be better than not doing anything about it. So that's the basic concept about resilience community, is being as ecologically sustainable as we can with a safety margin. But the problem we have is that, as Neil mentioned earlier, we are in an advanced state of ecological overshoot. We're very far from, we're kind of on the edge of that cliff in terms of ecological breakdown. You know, there's accelerating, approaching ecological tipping points that would be very unfriendly to human civilization. So we're very far from where we need to be. And it gives rise to what I refer to as the resilience dilemma. You know, do we preserve and return or bounce back to a techno-industrial notion of progress, which is kind of the dominant worldview or mindset? Or after an adverse event, do we return to an ecologically sustainable kind of society? So these are really contrasting worldviews, and they determine how we, I think, view the world, view scientific data and reports, and view the kinds of solutions that might be appropriate to dealing with the adverse event, or the underlying dynamic of the adverse events, which I would argue is advanced ecological overshoot, which in some is simply too many people putting too much demand on natural sources and sinks. You know, climate change is a big part of that, and it's approximately 60% of ecological overshoot. So even if we solve the climate issue, there's still a considerable amount of demands on nature that we have to reduce in order to escape overshoot. So taking this into consideration as we think about building community resilience, I think is a really important issue. Staying on the issue of worldviews or mindsets for a moment, I think it's something that might be helpful. You know, we develop worldviews just by osmosis as we grow up and become acculturated in a society, and we're often not even aware of what our worldviews are until they're challenged in some way. And I would suggest that it's called different things by different scholars. Some refer to this as modernity. But the technical industrial progress, the idea of technical industrial progress is quite different from that of ecological integrity, which I would suggest is what should be our overriding priority, because without this, nothing else really matters very much or is going to be possible. You know, appreciating that we are all part of the web of life and not, you know, and that human exceptionalism is not going to serve us very well. You know, realizing that material sufficiency is really all we need, having those basic needs met.
Yeah, I worked it really hard.
Yeah.
And I just went to the physio and they're like, yep, looks like you bruised your bone. Like, like, don't do anything that hurts it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Hang on. We'll have some discussion as I go through this. Hang on a moment, Anissa. Again, appreciating that there are biophysical limits rather than, you know, expecting unlimited economic growth, looking for social solutions as well as technical ones, and not relying solely on technical ones, which is our tendency now because that's a way that we can make money. having a more decentralized bottom-up approach to understanding our local situation rather than centralized and top-down, and being democratically driven, and not in a representative way, but in a participatory way, I would suggest is part of the ecological perspective rather than the market being market-driven, which is where we are now. And also emphasizing the importance of community, I am because we are idea, as opposed to the kind of individualism that characterizes the techno-industrial progress notion. And competition and cooperation are always going to be present, but the current paradigm is much more competitive when what we really need is more cooperation on these issues. The ecological worldview promotes low inequality and wants to ensure that material sufficiency occurs for everyone. Nature is very cooperative and make sure that everyone's needs are provided. What's interesting is that both the technical industrial progress and the ecological perspective also identify human creativity as incredibly important. And I agree with that. The difference is what one applies one's creativity to, whether it's promoting the techno-industrial progress or ecological integrity. So the ecological view is based on looking at nature to sustain and maintain us, and appreciating that over literally millions of years, nature has learned how to do this extremely well. And I would suggest is wiser, to anthropomorphize a bit, than any of us, because it's had this incredible experiment over these millions of years to ensure that the web of life is diverse and complex and strong. Okay. So some other comments about worldviews. In addition to the fact that we aren't necessarily always aware of our worldviews, even when we are, we appreciate that we need to move from one to the other. All of us are stuck in this techno-industrial progress one, and it's impossible not to be influenced by that and to have some of our wishes and ideas about living well influenced by it, because there's so much marketing and advertising that gets aimed at us. But for those of us who have an increasing awareness of the importance of an ecological worldview or mindset, it's a struggle to operate in these two frameworks, and we flip between one and the other. So it's a bit jumbled, about how we operate. And I think it's helpful to realize and not beat up on ourselves that, we have these internal conflicts. It's just the way things have evolved. But I think it's really important that we try to understand each of these different worldviews, how the techno-industrial progress one is influencing us, and what the benefits and importance of the ecological perspective is. Because I think without it, we're not going to get very far. So what about comments on worldviews? What do people think about the importance of worldviews and how they influence the way we think about the science and solutions? Neil?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Neil.
Thanks, Jack. Look, I take a very evolutionary perspective, as other people do. The last 10,000 years have been an experiment since the agricultural revolution. The last 300 years, with fossil fuels fueling everything, have been a complete aberration, really, complete aberration. For most of our evolution, we live in small groups. We cooperate. There's nothing like what we live like at the moment. So you're right. We've created this trap through mismatch, severe mismatch, where, in my perspective, we can't get out of this trap without, as you say, a reactive disruption. It's the only way. And we're going to have to be prepared for significant energy reductions. Is going to be a driver. Material throughputs is going to reduce. We're going to be forced to go back to cooperation. Our evolutionary past, that's what's going to happen. We just have to be realistic about this. Doing one, step at a time. There is no time left. We're basically at a tipping point. If you look at the Antarctic sea ice, that is a tipping point. 2023 and 24, that has been a complete aberration. We are now in a tipping point. The Antarctica research folk put out a newsletter today. It looks terrible. They're holding an emergency meeting next month. There is no time left, so we have to be prepared for what's coming. And so,
sure.
Yeah, I mean, that is
any other comments on the worldview portion of it? We'll have a chance for a broader discussion at the end, but I just wanted to focus on the worldviews at this point, Neil. Any other comments?
Had his hand up. Bruce Anderson, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, like you said, with competition versus cooperation, I thought also technical solutions versus social solutions. The thing is, these things are all out of balance with each other, and way out of balance in a polar direction sort of thing. I mean, I broadly agreed with most of what Neil said, except saying we're going to have to cooperate. No, yeah, if that means it's going to drive us to cooperate, no way. We're much more likely to go feudal. But the ecological worldviews are also very close to many indigenous worldviews. And as Neil said, we've spent 300, maybe 1,000, maybe a couple of thousand years, maybe 300 years driving ourselves as far away from those more integrated indigenous worldviews than we ever had been in our previous evolution. So no arguments again with your listings or anything like that, just observations on them.
Okay, thanks. Veronica, go ahead.
Hi. Hi, I'm Veronica. I liked that table that you put up about the worldviews, Jack. I thought that was a very interesting way to look at the two different philosophies, I guess. The only thing that I would say is I'm not always 100% convinced that it's useful to use a diametric either or, because I don't think it's as simple as either or all the time. And sometimes that can create a lot of division as people jump onto one or other side of the fence. But I think it is useful to think about them as continuums, if you like, between the extreme of one to the extreme of other, and as an exercise for people to think about where they actually sit on the different things, because it won't be on the technology side I fit on the extreme all this side or I'm all that side. If I looked at my own worldviews, which I probably need to dive into, and kind of like you're saying, you sometimes don't know what yours are, I probably find that some of them are a little bit more towards the technology and some of them are probably way more towards the ecological, but I'm on a continuum there somewhere, and moving around too, depending on where I am in my life. So I think that's a really useful tool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks you, Veronica. No, I think that's an important point to make. And it brings in, I think, the issue of the difference between what's necessary and what's feasible, because what's necessary is so difficult. I think an argument could be made that those two worldviews are quite incompatible in the ideal, in terms of what we need to do with respect to escaping ecological overshoot. But what's feasible in the short term is I mean, we have to use technologies that we have at the moment. But the question is understanding, again, what is necessary from an ecological perspective, because if we miss that, we're really heading in a direction that's not going to be, won't matter too much,
Yeah, agree.
Okay, anyway, thank you. There's one other.
Jack, there's Anissa did want to come in, I believe, and then after,
Yes, please, by all means.
and then after her, Molly.
Okay, Anissa, go ahead. Are you there?
Sorry, no, I was just, I accidentally unmuted. Please continue. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Molly. Hi there, Molly. Go ahead.
Are you there, Molly? Why don't we just go ahead with Sue Jepson?
Yeah, we can come back to Molly if she.
Oh, no,
she
Molly's come back.
wishes.
Here's Molly.
Hi.
Okay, good.
Transition Towns Lower Hutt has just launched a project with the Wainuiomata Marae to do just what this webinar is about, that is community resilience, by building a tiny forest of local native trees, shrubs, and medicinal plants. By a particular technique, I won't tell you about it, but we believe that this can make Wainuiomata a center of resilience based and founded in the indigenous perception of how to live with nature and value it. So I've just put in the chat a link to that project. I would be delighted if any people would click on the link and have a look at what that project is aiming to do. I think community resilience is exactly what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. No, that's really important work. The whole idea of greening cities and helping them move in the direction of 15-minute cities, I think is a really important initiative, and the project you're talking about is a great example of that.
Thank you.
Sue, go ahead.
Hi. There's a couple of things. One, I was struck by learning that some people in Florida were deciding not to move out of the way of the hurricane Milton coming their way. The reports were that it was going to be disastrous for anyone in its path, and yet people did not leave, they did not evacuate. And that points to a state of mind that is strange. So I'm a bit thoughtful about the psychology behind people's decisions and whether or not we can do anything about it, where people decide to wait and see what will happen and deal with it at the time. They don't seem to be able to recognize the enormity of what we're facing, and they don't want to. This is my impression. Secondly, on local resilience, I did learn that in our area of Tasman, that Tapawera, they are creating a new group on to do with sustainable and resilience with a community garden. So that's really helpful, and I'm encouraged by that. And I looked at the Open Polytechnic website because I used to mark papers on the horticulture course, and I've seen that they're still running both the level 3 ordinary horticulture course and the organic horticulture course as well, again at level 3, which I think would be very useful to spread the word about, so that more people can take some practical action. One thing that bothers me with all of this is that we can do these local things, and yes, they make a difference locally, but actually the enormity of the cultural, economic steps that we have to take to change is hard. And then we're up against also I don't know if any of you have heard of it, the Atlas Network, which is an international far-right organization, which is very scary. And we're up against that, their machinations in New Zealand, are what brought the Labour government down eventually. So I suppose I'm more interested actually in what we can do practically to persuade people to come on board and understand what's ahead, so that we've got more people working together. Sorry, thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Yeah, well, with respect to your last point, I think there's such a broad range of, as you say, from people not even moving from a hurricane when they've been told to, that there's such a broad range of reactions to these issues that I think the important thing is to find like-minded people and work with them to begin with, and it's a place to start, something that we can actually do. Yeah. So
Okay,
someone else has their hand up there?
Benjamin Walsh from Motueka.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think what I was thinking while we were chatting, and I think Sue potentially provided an answer to my question, is that the techno-industrial progress seems to be a bit of a backseat attitude. It's easy to fall into that narrative because it means other people are going to solve the problem and technology is going to solve the problem. So it's much easier to fall into that. It doesn't require personal action. It means you can just focus on your day-to-day problems and not really have to expand your consciousness or have altruism as a core value. And so my question was, how do we move more people from that techno-industrial progress narrative to the ecological integrity narrative? And I think one of the answers is what Sue just said, getting people to practically work together, I think, and discover the benefits of working in community. But I was curious to see if other people had other thoughts on how we shift more people over, knowing that the techno-industrial progress narrative is just so much easier to believe in.
Yeah, well, that's really what developing community resilience is all about. Yeah. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we get into the how, as we've been focusing pretty much on the what so far. Neil, you had another comment?
Well, it's really more to do with the how. So perhaps I'll just wait on that, Jack.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, was there anyone else who had a question or comment? Okay, well, let's move now from the what. We've talked about adverse events and the difference between adverse events and the disruption they can cause and how to try to minimize that. We've talked about the uncertainties that creates. We've talked about the certainty of basic needs and as a potential way of bringing people together to work on basic needs. And we've talked a bit about worldviews in terms of the impact it has on how we understand some of these issues. So let's now turn to how we can ensure basic needs from an ecological perspective. Okay? As opposed to simply looking at it to try to solve the climate crisis, for example. Simplest technologies available. And I contrast this, for example, with the idea of simply electrifying everything as the way of reducing, greenhouse gases and dealing with climate change. The simpler the technologies, the less ecological impact they're going to have. But what's also equally important, even more important from an empowering perspective, is that if the technologies are simple that we're using to meet our basic needs, then we're going to be able to control them rather than other people controlling them. And I think that's going to become increasingly important. So that's, I think, a basic principle in terms of how to ensure basic needs from an ecological perspective. Simple technologies that you can control, fix yourself, maintain, and so on. Minimizing energy and material resources. Again, this is essential to escape ecological overshoot. We are using way too much energy, doesn't matter what the source is. Some sources are obviously worse than others, but the absolute amount of energy is also highly relevant. So the less energy we use and the less material resources we use to meet our basic needs is something to think about as we approach this issue of trying to build our resilience. Equally important, I think, is the whole issue of inclusivity. You know, working with people in your neighborhood or your community doesn't mean you all have to be bosom buddies. It means there's a recognition that you have common interests in ensuring that your collective basic needs are met, because that's the way we function best as a social species. And there's less disruption socially and less undesirable social costs if everyone's basic needs are met. How to do this is not easy. Obviously, we have these conflicting worldviews within ourselves as well as within society. And I don't think it's desirable to leave it to government or to the marketplace to do these things, so that increasing ways of engaging in participatory democracy, I think, are really crucial elements in trying to understand and plan for community resilience. Citizens' assemblies are a really great example, I think, of how people can engage with difficult and complex issues and yet come up with a high degree of consensus if there's a good process for the participation. So another key principle I would suggest is ensuring local control of key resources and services that address essential needs, basic needs, whether they're material or non-material, not relying on remote, governments or corporations, but to ensure that we can have local control over these things. And of course, trying to regenerate the natural systems that we've been destroying unintentionally, but nonetheless doing a good job of it. So engaging in regeneration projects of various kinds in natural systems. So again, this is the sort of list of things to think about in developing plans for resilience in such a way that it brings an ecological perspective to it, as opposed to the techno-industrial perspective, which relies on technology, and it just makes the overshoot worse. So again, I'll stop at this point and ask about your people's reactions to these sets of principles, if you will, or approaches to ensuring basic needs from an ecological perspective.
Deirdre's got her hand up. Go ahead, Deirdre. Unmute yourself.
On that list, you've got basic control, local control over key resources and services. Well, if we look around the country at the moment, all local councils are short of money for basic infrastructure and even earthquake strengthening of public buildings and public things. Now you can't, I wonder if anyone's got a hunch that one of these days local councils will rebel and say, no, central government, you can't tell me what to do. We're a government and we will create our own money for a start. That sort of thing.
Well, short answer is I hope so.
They're going to have to rise up. And I wonder how, whether anyone has got any hunch, an idea that it'll happen quickly.
Well, the current government is putting pressure on local councils to more explicitly adopt a techno-industrial progress perspective.
Yeah, sure.
And they're withholding funds, or they're making funding conditional on councils supporting business.
And we've got a monoculture of currencies, which is not ecological.
Yeah, and
One currency.
as you say, that it's the Deirdre, everyone should know, is part of the Living Economies Network, which promotes alternative currencies. And if you're interested in that, Deirdre is the person to talk to about it.
I'm just doing PowerPoint on it at the moment.
Yeah, good on you. Sue.
Yeah, Deirdre, hi. Hi, Deirdre. You were asking, has anybody got a hunch, will anything happen soon to make the local councils rebel? Well, coming back to this government again, they're putting terrific pressure on the removal of anything that's sort of remotely supportive of Maori, and they're trying to force local governments to hold referendums on Maori presence in councils, and already there seems to be a number of councils opposing that already. So I think this government might be having a hand in its own undoing by putting so much pressure on local governments and people as well.
Okay, Neil, go ahead.
I mean, really, energy underpins modern techno-industrial society, and once energy collapses, basically, the whole thing collapses. It's a house of cards. The whole thing falls over. So it'll be demonetized, and it'll be a gift economy. I don't think we need to worry about money, which is one of those great human constructs. Probably the most widely accepted story that's been created, but I'm afraid it's going to fall apart. So that's my comment.
Yeah, well, if it does, it will create a lot of chaos. That's part of the difficulty, is how do we minimize the disruption that would occur from the collapse of a money system, and that's part of what the resilient community ideas would be about.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about the pro-social stuff for when you want me to do that, Jake.
Okay, just yep. If you just hang on a moment. So the other point I wanted to make about this approach to ensuring basic needs sustainably, in New Zealand, we're very fortunate in having a model in many Maori communities, and Marae do this. They look after their people, and often when there are adverse events occurring like earthquakes, it's the Marae that provide a lot of these ensuring people's basic needs are met. And it's interesting that there was some comment earlier about Indigenous people's mindsets being very similar to the ecological integrity perspective. And I think that's true. And again, I think we have a lot to learn from some Maori communities who are ahead of us in how well they do these things. Okay, so one way of summarizing, without getting into a lot of detail, but just in terms of trying to clarify some concepts, we could say that key features of a resilient community are local community control, ensuring basic needs for everyone, not only when adverse events occur, but all the time. And if we think about those basic needs, both material and non-material, and how we can ensure them locally within our bioregion or even just our neighborhood to begin with, I think we would be making a big step to developing, resilience and contributing to more ecologically sustainable way of living. Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's using the tools of the master, but the Euro Federation, of course, proposed or popularized the concept of subsidiarity, which quite brilliantly meant that the center is subsidiary to the peripheries, or the higher the level of government, the more subsidiary it is to local news. Its basic principle is what you've written there, that the local community is in control of ensuring basic needs for everybody, to the extent that they can, and only then, when it can't, as for instance, if you need higher education and things like that, you need some sort of organization for it that might go beyond the local community. Only then do you create the vehicles or bring in the vehicles that work at that more, that different level. I hesitate to say higher level, but yes, if we could push the idea of subsidiarity, it's actually quite, what's the word? Inside the techno-industrial framework. So I hate to say it.
Well, not necessarily. I don't think it's a concept that can float between the two. I would suggest,
Okay.
but I would agree. The whole idea of subsidiarity is that you put control at the lowest possible level that it can be effective. And if one bioregion can't produce something, then hopefully your neighboring bioregions can. So again, that's brings this simple statement doesn't go into a lot of detail of what your community would look like if it were resilient, because that's something you have to work out for your own community, because your risks will be different, the likely adverse events are different, and so on. That actually comes to the next slide in terms of how do we move in this direction. And a key, of course, is working with others, and that's one thing that we're not doing very well yet. Again, the Marais, I think, provide a real example of how to do this, but and there are lots of examples in terms of things like community gardens and public housing and various kinds of house sharing arrangements, tiny homes. All of those can contribute to doing things at the local community level. But getting people together seems to be the big obstacle. If there are finding like-minded people in your community is a really is a challenge. The community resource group that DANZ has been running for the last several months has a number of people involved, but most of us are on our own. We don't have immediate neighbors or other community members who are interested in the same things or have this ecological worldview or have the time to devote to it. But these are some of the steps is to connect with people, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be about community resilience at the beginning. It's simply connecting with them at a human level, of having barbecues or potlucks or doing music together, whatever works for your particular community. But then identifying your local priorities, which of the basic needs in your local community are not being well met, and which are likely to get worse because of the likely adverse events that are coming. assess your own strengths and weaknesses in that community of being able to do better in terms of meeting those basic needs, and make up a plan and implement it, and then monitor it. But keep monitoring the risks, because the risks are going to change, most likely. You know, they're going to get more intense and likely come at us faster. So continuing to monitor the risks, I think, is quite important. And to share these ideas with other communities, you know, whatever you're doing, whatever you find that works or doesn't work. I mean, this is clearly a long-term project. It's, you know, but starting small and however you can in terms of connecting with like-minded people and expanding that circle, and trying to have fun in the meantime in the way you go about it, is the way to go. Just want to touch on some of the benefits from a resilient community. You know, again, first and foremost, it's the security of basic needs, regardless of what comes our way. That should give a sense of security and satisfaction, life satisfaction, and it's a meaningful thing to do for yourselves and the people that you connect with on a regular basis. And that meaningful connection with others, you know, providing support, because we all need support at various times, and enjoying each other in the process. And even if you don't necessarily, you know, like everybody as the best buddy, you can still connect on these things and find greater effectiveness in working together. So focusing on the common good, again, back to basic needs, reduces polarization. And I think that's a really important thing given the way our communities are going. It can also reduce the cost of living, because when you simplify things and you reduce your energy and material needs, you don't have to spend as much money. In fact, one of the best things you can do for living sustainably is not spend money or develop you know, alternative currencies, the way that Deirdre was talking about. And I think this approach to resilient communities, by focusing on basic needs, by reducing material throughput, I think can make a genuine contribution to sustainability, because we are approaching tipping points that we don't want to cross, because they are many of them are irreversible. So it's quite important that we do this. Another benefit is it sets an example, not only for other communities and for other people who don't necessarily see things this way, but also for politicians who, if they see people willing to take some responsibility and focus on these things and ensuring that everyone is included, everyone's basic needs are met, and participatory democracy and cooperation and so on are things that we all want, maybe they'll actually help and support it in some way. And of course, ultimately, if we get this right, you know, our chances of surviving and living well into the future is going to increase. So these are some of the benefits that we see in taking this sort of approach. And Bruce has a hand up again. Go ahead, Bruce.
Sorry to keep asking questions or making comments.
Go ahead.
Look at that, and say to yourself, oh, well, there's not a vision, not just for a resilient community, but for the community, the sort of community I want to live in. If you reversed your presentation to perhaps a less receptive audience, Jack, and started with this, hey, would you like to be this then? Here's how you get there. Could also help you test your own arguments about where the divergences are. But it's the sort of thing I'm looking for all the time is how do you start the story that'll help people say, yeah, it's useful to try and do something and to try and do something together.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes you have to go slow to get there. And And jumping too quickly into the adverse events may scare people. So simply just trying to make connections.
Sorry, my point wasn't, no, sorry, my point was go exactly the opposite way. If you start from your vision.
Yeah, no, I took that. I think it's a great idea. Thank you for that one, Bruce. Yeah. Robin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Jack. Lots to think about. Along with many others, I was very disappointed that the post-COVID reset was back to the techno-industrial rather than seeing the potential for a more sustainable development. But I keep feeling like there's a huge need for education and something like kind of town hall, well, maybe that's too big, village hall discussion groups led by facilitators with training to start the conversations about potential futures and all of the things that you've been discussing tonight, to start bringing it into people's consciousness, so that when these disasters of one sort or another befall us, that, you know, people have some preparation and a plan in place, and, you know, all of those sorts of things. And it feels like the government's not going to step up and do that in any useful way. So, you know, maybe that can be a starting point of bringing together people who have this interest and see the need.
Yeah, I think that's another type of activity that could be done that would be very useful. You know, whatever works in your community is the thing to do. I see someone else has their hand raised after Robin, but I can't see who. Who else? Oh, Neil's again. Go ahead, Neil.
I take. I think what you're saying, Jack, is that we have to move slowly towards this great slide of yours. But there's a huge paradox here, is that there's actually no time. So, so if we go back to what's actually happened here, the biological, cultural coevolution is a really important concept. Someone's raised the possibility of psychology of some people has changed. I think someone said that there were people who were not willing to listen when the Florida disaster was happening. I mean, these things have sort of evolved. And so what we need to try and do is go back and evolve ourselves again, back to really what we were, because we've created cultures which have actually affected our biological evolution. That's a very important concept. If you have a look at, I'll put the website links up there, Pro-Social World. It's a joint project by David Sloan Wilson, who's an evolutionary biologist, and Paul Atkins, a psychologist. And so basically it's all about pro-sociality, which is what you're talking about, really. It's that sort of what makes it's basically the property that makes an adaptive unit, and that's what we're trying to do here, is become an adaptive unit. All work together towards a common good. And so we'll have to go back and re-evolve that, if you like, through this sort of co-evolutionary process. So I've put a little link up there to one of the Pro-Social World articles, and it goes through the work of Len Ostrom and Wayne Teasdale to do with management of common pool resources and what principles apply in those groups when they have to effectively sustainably manage common pool resources. And also Wayne Teasdale work on spirituality, how that's going to be an essential component of functional groups. So I've put that in there. There is a way through this. There is good research out there as to what we need to do. And so I just wanted to say those points, and that really there isn't time left, I'm afraid. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly agree with you that we do not have a lot of time, but trying to force some of these things is also not likely to be helpful. So starting slow may actually get us going faster than rushing into some of the heavier issues. That was the point I was trying to make. One possible way for anyone who's interested in continuing with these issues is to join the DANZ Community Resilience Group. It's not a group that pretends to have all the answers. It's a forum to share ideas and resources, to identify common obstacles, and to support each other to develop local community resilience projects and ultimately a community resilience network. It's definitely got to focus on the ecological approach. And we recognize that this task is unprecedented, in terms of the global scale of issues that we face. So we very badly need each other. We are social creatures. That's the way we evolved. That's the way we've survived. And that's the way we're going to continue living well in the future if we can. And I'll close with just leaving you with a quote that I came across today from Charles Darwin that I've added a clause to. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, and I've added nor the wealthiest. It is the one most adaptable to change. And that's really what we're talking about, despite the difficulty of facing the kinds and levels of change that are needed. So I'll stop there, and again, we'll open it to a more general discussion.
Jack, can I butt in? It's Andy here.
Hi there, Andy.
How you doing? Jack, you very eloquently put the issues forward, and some of us in Golden Bay are trying to address a lot of the issues in the way we're going and through the process of community emergency preparedness planning. But the fundamental thing is that if individuals are not heading down their own individual degrowth journey to a 2.25 sustainable carbon lifestyle, they're a part of the problem. And also, if individuals are not have an ability in an emergency situation to be self-reliant in both resources and energy for 5 days as required or as wanted by civil defence, they're a liability. And I put it out to all the people at this webinar, are you going down those paths, and are you 5 days resilient? And if you're not, maybe you should start at home and do your own bit of effort, and then you're in the position to actually advise others on the pathway. It's really easy and lovely to sit and listen to Jack, but we're not actually individually changing our own lives because we're all too busy, and in many cases we actually don't want to change. And we're coming up against that problem time and time again in Golden Bay, and that's why the emergency preparedness planning at least has something concrete to work towards and to be resilient against, rather than the resilience needed to deal with climate change. It's too generalized, and once you've got the processes in place for emergency preparedness planning, then it can be broadened out into strengthening communities and using resources to make ourselves more resilient to climate change.
Yeah, no, I agree, Andy, that the civil defense and disaster management planning is certainly a place to connect with, because it is important. I mean, they're critically important because of the issues that we face. But we have to realize that again, they deal with the immediate events. You know, there's not a lot of attention in the civil defense and disaster management planning to actually build resilience. They talk about community resilience, but there's not much concept development of what it actually means or how to develop it. And I would actually like to see councils increasing attention to that issue to connect with the points that you're making. You know, I think they're supplementary. You know.
Perhaps one more question if we have one, because we are moving on with time.
I just encourage people to remember that Darwinian quote. The species that survives is the ones that adapts to change. Matthias.
Sorry, I'm on my mobile and I have to figure out all the little buttons here. About the quote, actually was thinking about it. Thanks very much about the Darwinian quote. We have to remember that humans are probably, of all the species, the most adaptable ones. Unfortunately, this is what I got us where we are. So we are in this space at the moment, in my view, because we've sort of managed to use all sorts of tools and find all sorts of minerals and got the whole civilization going. And then you're getting hurricanes and floods and things. And then, you know, people rescue other people, others fall by the wayside, but we're still extremely adaptable, I would say, whereas a lot of other species are very sensitive to minute changes. And in a way, we are so successful with our adaptability that we are now a threat to all the other species that are less adaptable. So anyway, it's just a philosophical thought about that quote, which sounds convincing on the surface, but it's got a sting in the tail.
Sure. I mean, as all of these quotes, they need to be unpacked a bit. And, you know, it's a question of how, again, I think the worldview becomes an important issue. I mean, our culture has gone in one direction. So anyway, you know, thanks for that. We're going to have to end, but I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that I've corrected my email in the chat. If anybody is interested in joining the DANZ Community Resilience Group, I'd love to hear from you. My email is in the chat there, and get in touch and we'll ensure that you get the notices of when we meet. Thanks. I think it's going to be over to you, Bev.
Yes, Jack, that was, as I said, a wonderful webinar, and your comment, Matthias, about we being well adapted. We need to change the direction of our adaptation and become part of the community of the world, not just people, but our whole environment and all who live there. So I want to finish with a karakia, closing karakia in Cook Island Māori, because we must think of our Pacific neighbours and how they are also part of our community.
Here is a prayer.
Yeah. So it is a real prayer, and the Cook Island people are based on Christianity for the most part. So I will just close with this beautiful karakia. E hatua e haroa mai ia mātou. Tamariki a te tangata nei, kia hora mātou, kia koe, amene. O God, bless us, children of man. May we live on because of you. Amen. And thank you and goodbye.
Good. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you
And
very
get
much.
something going.
Thanks, Jack.
Get something going in your community.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
That was